everyone. Thank you for being here this afternoon, whether you're in the room with us or watching on Zoom. My name is Lauren Williams, and I'm with the Columbia Public Library, part of the Danube Regional Library System. Thanks for joining us for today's Lunch and Learn, where we're going to be talking about ethics in city government. Today's Lunch and Learn is co-hosted by the library and the League of Women Voters of Columbia-Boone County. And since we have people attending both in person and Zoom, we have a couple Zoom housekeeping items. If you're on Zoom and you want to ask a question, please use the chat feature. We ask you use the drop-down menu and chat and select that everyone can see your question so people know what has been asked. And when it's time for those here in the room to ask questions, I'll be walking around with this microphone to make sure that those who are participating online can hear their questions as well. We are recording this presentation, so it will be available on both the League of Women Voters YouTube channel and the library's YouTube channel in just a few days for future viewing. And I'd like to welcome Barbara Hoppy with the League to introduce our speaker.
Thank you so much, Lauren, and the Public Library, Columbia Public Library, for co-hosting our programs. I'm really pleased today to introduce Columbia City, not county, attorney Nancy Thompson, who will talk on ethics in city government. What is it and why do we need it? And I wanted to tell you a little bit about Nancy. Before that, and I've known Nancy for quite a long time. When I was on council, we interacted, but not with ethics problems.
Never with Barbara.
Yeah. Nancy became city attorney in April of 2013 after Fred Bachman, who was city attorney for 26 years, retired. And apparently Nancy knew Fred pretty well and he was highly respected by Nancy and many other city attorneys. So before she came to the job as a city attorney, she was city attorney at Riverside, Missouri, which is north of Kansas City. She is a native of Sweet Springs, Missouri. She earned her bachelor's degree from William Woods University, and then a law degree from the University of Missouri, Kansas City. And she has been in the area, working in the area of city law, city-related law for 38 years. She's been also an attorney at Raytown in Gladstone, Missouri, and has represented private firms for city municipalities. So with that, I give you Nancy Thompson.
Thank you, Barbara. Yes, Barbara was part of that council, I think, that hired me, right? So I'm fortunate to be here, known Barbara for almost 13 years. So we're gonna hope that's lucky number 13. It's really my fortune to have been able to work in local government for as long as I have. As Barbara mentioned, I had worked in-house in several municipalities in the Kansas City metro before this job became available, which I never thought would become available. My predecessor was an icon in municipal law, but when it did, I took the opportunity and said, if there's one place I'd rather move or would live other than where we lived in Gladstone, Missouri at the time, it was Columbia. So my family's here. My maiden name is Worley, so if any of you happen to know Bob or Karen Worley in town, they've been in town for a long time. That's my brother and sister-in-law. And then my kids both live in town. At the time I moved here, my mother was still alive. So anyway, lots of ties to Columbia. And because we're in the library today, I thought I would start off the presentation by reading a little bit from an article in the Kansas City Star to kind of set the tone of maybe why we're here, what we're seeing in municipalities around the state country. The title of the article in the Kansas City Star that's been published this year, and it's a series that they're running, is called Broken Government. It's a special project from the Kansas City Star that exposes the way governments at all levels across Missouri and Kansas fail to work for residents and taxpayers. Over 16 years, Tracy Carmen made herself a fixture of small town government in the eastern Missouri city of Center, population 528. As city clerk, she kept the books and took minutes at meetings. Her husband was the police chief. Carmen volunteered at elementary schools and was active in her church. She often watched her son play on the baseball field. The city council trusted her. A sprawling years-long fraud lurked beneath the surface. From 2015 to 2019, Carmen stole at least $316,000 from the city of Center. She stayed at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, the harbor shores on Lake Geneva in Wisconsin, and an Illinois bed and breakfast, all on the city's dime. Over 4 years, she spent $2,645 at a hair salon and $9,621 in restaurants. Amazon and Walmart purchases alone totaled nearly $58,000. Deception kept the money flowing. Carmen then called Tracy Ray, falsified financial reports and lists of bills prepared for city council meetings. But she also benefited from the extraordinary level of autonomy that the city leaders had given her. The mayor and council didn't probe deeply into the city's finances or insist on simple methods of oversight. The scheme collapsed quickly and violently. After learning in late June of 2019 that Center had failed to file required financial reports with the state, the mayor confronted Carmen and she promised to address the situation when she returned from vacation on July 1. Carmen didn't show up for work that day. On July 2, the Rawls County Sheriff and a deputy attempted to arrest the clerk, who had a gun. They used a taser on her, and the sheriff's office describes what happened next as a shootout that left both the sheriff and the deputy injured. Carmen's federal public defender said she fired a round into the ground and the officers shot her multiple times, but she survived. A report by the Missouri State Auditor's Office found that Tracy Carmen used more than $200,000 in city funds to pay personal credit card bills. Federal prosecutors charged the former clerk, Tracy Carmen, with wire fraud and theft from a federal program. Her ex-husband was not criminally charged. State prosecutors also charged her in the shooting. She pleaded guilty in both cases and is serving a 10-year sentence in the Chillicothe Correction Center. While Carmen's case stands out for its shocking details, Center is far from alone in suffering the consequences of financial fraud and mismanagement. A months-long investigation by the Star shows how small towns and local governments repeatedly fall victim to fraud and how officials misuse public funds in incidents that tear apart communities and deprive them of precious resources. A 2022 report by the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners found government accounts for 18% of occupational fraud cases, with local government making up 25% of those cases. The median loss to local governments in fraud cases is $125,000 per incident. Last year, a former Johnson County District Court accounting supervisor admitted in court that she embezzled more than $1 million and created false documents to cover up the crime, as another example. Still, bigger governments and agencies often have more stringent financial securities in place. Missouri enjoys a major check on fraud. A state auditor who often plays a pivotal role in exposing misconduct by issuing reports. However, while the auditor has a relatively free hand to examine state agencies, Missouri law restricts the ability of the auditor to initiate audits of municipalities. Quote, "We do have the ability to investigate fraud allegations, but our authority stops at investigation. We can't go in and do a full-scale audit," close quote, said Missouri State Auditor Scott Fitzpatrick. Currently, municipalities must either invite in the auditor or enough residents must sign a petition. And the article, and I wanted to read that level to you, the article goes on. I mean, it describes other cities in Missouri, it describes other communities that are facing similar problems. So, you know, what we're talking about today is not just a hypothetical, it's actually things that are happening in our communities. It's happening in the state of Missouri, and you're going to see from the slides that it's also happening nationwide. So where are we and why are we here? The role of ethics laws, they exist to provide accountability to the public. They exist to protect the public from misuse of public resources, and then they also exist to punish wrongdoers. If you're caught, you need to be punished, and it needs to be significant enough to be able to deter the conduct from occurring elsewhere. The guiding principles of all of the ethics laws that you'll see are that government officials are in positions to serve the public. Your position and the funds that you have and the resources available to you are not for personal benefit. We're going to take a look today at the laws at the federal level, the state level, and then the local level here in Columbia that exist to deter unethical conduct by officials. Start with local law. That's what we're all most interested in. Our local law really adopts state law by reference. So we're going to spend a lot more time really talking about state law, but it applies at the local level. Our Columbia City Charter contains what we call an affirmative duty to vote on the part of a council member. So a council member, as an elected official, is required to vote. And they have to declare any conflicts of interest in writing if they're not going to vote, or if they have a conflict of interest. That has to be presented to the city clerk. It's kept on file. And then a council member has to receive permission from their fellow council members to abstain or not vote on a particular issue. So your council only really is prohibited from voting or taking official action when there is a conflict of interest under state or local law. Those same laws apply to employees. Obviously, employees don't get an opportunity to vote, but an employee is not entitled to hold any office or employment pursuant to our city code if you happen to be in arrears for any obligations owed to the city. Taxes, court orders, traffic violations, parking tickets, any of those things. So we encourage our employees to get those taken care of. We haven't enforced that provision in a long time, understanding that people's circumstances are somewhat different, but a knowing willful violation will get a city employee in trouble. And then also our local laws and ordinances provide for specific conflicts of interest related to boards and commission members. A board or commission member cannot have any interest in a matter that comes before the board or commission where there would be a financial interest or benefit to their spouse, so, or themselves, or any member of their family. That sets the landscape then, what's really happening at the state law, where the real meat and potatoes of conflicts of interest laws lie. I have two Bibles that I use in my work. One of those is what I call the Sunshine Law book. If any of you haven't seen this or don't have it, it's available online, but I keep at least 2 or 3 of these on my desk, and I turn to it, I annotate it, I mark in it, I highlight it. It's the world's best when it comes to trying to understand what the Sunshine Law is and how it applies. But the other one, for purposes of today, is really is found on the Missouri Ethics Commission website. And that's the conflict of interest handbook that is created by the Ethics Commission, which is the enforcement arm at the state level, and as it relates to local officials as well. And if you're interested in ethics complaints or violations, anything that might be a violation of any of the things we're going to talk about, they maintain a site where they receive complaints and then they follow up on those with their decision making. So any kind of opinions that they have released out of the Ethics Commission is available on their site. And I actually think it's mec.mo.gov. And then I did get a question before we got started about, are there any resources out there about how to be an elected official? And an organization in Missouri called the Missouri Municipal League. And they create what's called a manual for newly elected officials. While not a lot of this applies in Columbia because we are a charter form of government, it sets the framework for how local government operates from general council meetings and processes, procedures, simple budget adoption, things like that. So if you're interested in that, that's on the mostcities.com website. But that's not part of my Bible. These are part of the Bible. The under state law, your elected officials and city employees are subject as anybody else to laws that are applicable to the public in general. But they're also subject to particular laws related to duty in public office. And these are the things that you normally see. It's kind of like the big ills: bribing a public servant, acceding to corruption, obstructing government operations, official misconduct or misuse of official information. Official misconduct is a Class A misdemeanor to knowingly discriminate and receive money above and beyond your normal compensation. If an individual knowingly solicits, accepts, or agrees to accept a benefit, direct or indirect, for themselves in exchange for their vote, opinion, recommendation, judgment, or decision, it is a Class D felony. But the vast majority of the material is going to focus on conflict of interest, which is found in the book that I showed you, as well as the chapter 105 of the statutes. I'm going to throw up another example, which is not too long ago. This is the auditor has a report for the Greenville, Missouri city clerk. Again, the auditor has the opportunity to go in and audit based upon either petition or request of the governing body. The auditor doesn't get to go in and actually investigate based upon rumor or supposition or citizen complaint. So in this instance, Nicole Galloway was the auditor at the time, and she investigated the Greenville city clerk and found that the Greenville city clerk had deposited checks written to herself from the city with cash and other unrelated checks into a personal bank account amounting to $62,000. And they found more than $160,000 missing from the city bank accounts. Improper payroll and other payments. And then at the same time was not performing her regular duties by collecting utility bills and other municipal payments. So that left the city depleted of its resources as well, even though she didn't appropriate those when you're not doing your job. Another example from Missouri. These are sad, by the way. They really are, but it gives you an idea of the breadth of the problem and why we really, as voters, as individuals who are part of the community, that we need to pay attention to what's going on in local government and support our elected officials, support our public officials in trying to uncover and do the right thing. This is Johnson County, Missouri Sheriff's Office was looking into employee misconduct within the city of Holden. And again, over $100,000 in expenditures by this particular individual. This is a little bit older case, but I keep this one because, I mean, this is small, but it's big. These two individuals were charged with felony theft from a cemetery association over accounts that they had managed. Eventually, they had made purchases in Florida, homes, other things. They wanted to live beyond their means, and they took advantage of the local association. And there was the mayor and the city clerk. They don't look so happy in the second picture. Comes down to what was that third pillar: to punish the wrongdoers, right? That's one of the one of the goals behind the ethics laws. And I wanted to share this one with you only because it gives you an idea of the additional scrutiny that elected officials come under. Subject to the criminal laws generally, not just ethics laws. This was a particular council member, not in the state of Missouri, but she ran a bridal shop, she didn't have a liquor license, and she was serving mimosas. So, as you know, when you're an elected official, you become under greater scrutiny. Social media goes rampant. In this particular instance, was arrested for serving mimosas. Okay, statutory conflict of interest. That's where the bulk of the rules and regulations related to elected officials and appointed officials lie. And I'm going to go through some of these fairly quickly because there's quite a bit of repeat amongst the provisions, but every single slide that I've got for you today is actually a different provision under state law. Whether it applies to elected officials or it applies to judicial or applies to persons in rulemaking authority. And yes, we do have those. For example, your planning commission here in Columbia are individuals with rulemaking authority, your board of adjustment. So board and commission members can be members with rulemaking authority. So I point all that out because as you go on, you'll be like, I think she said that before. And I'll be like, nope, that one's a little bit different. So the general rule for conflict of interest is that an official is prohibited from participating either directly or indirectly in an action that would result in a financial gain to their self, their spouse, or their dependent children. Have to report the conflict, and the penalty is for the first offense is a Class B misdemeanor of $500. Second offense is a Class D felony of $5,000 and up to 5 years in jail. The action that the official was participating in is nullified, so there's no gain from participating in that conduct, and then you're subject to liability for damages. So, prohibited acts from members of a governing body. A member of a governing body is prohibited from performing any service to the entity that they represent for any additional compensation. And this comes up from time to time when you have a council member, and we've had council members who have come to me and said, I want to do an adopt-a spot. We're like, that's really nice. We really want you to be civic minded. We want you to participate, but we can't provide you any compensation for that. Now, most people that do the adopt-a spot aren't really getting compensation for that either, but they are getting reimbursed for expenses. When you see a council member that has adopted a spot in the city of Columbia, typically those are done as a charitable endeavor by that individual because we don't pay them anything for doing that. They don't get any compensation or reimbursement of expenses. So just kind of it seems simple to say no additional compensation, but if a council member were to come repair something at City Hall, if that was part of their business, we cannot compensate them. And it does happen. A council member cannot sell, rent, or lease property to the city for more than $500 per transaction or $5,000 per year. But some of those cases can be mitigated by competitive bidding if there is public notice of the proposals and the bid by the official is the lowest and the best bid. Doesn't typically, again, come into play in a city the size of Columbia because we're not doing business with our elected officials. Some of the smaller communities that you see and read about in the Kansas City Star or other publications, it's a real problem for them because your elected official may be the owner of the local hardware store. And when they go out to repair utility lines or something, they may need to go and get either tools or goods and services. So it's an issue, but there is a way under state law where those issues can be addressed. Now, it also applies to any business to whom the individual is associated. And we're gonna talk a little bit about, and I don't have it on the next slide here, but it will be, up where we'll talk a little bit about what a business with which you're associated is. Other other officials of the municipality, this is different than the elected officials. Again, can't perform any service for additional compensation, can't sell or rent, but they also cannot participate or directly or indirectly to influence a decision that would result in financial gain. So it's a little bit of a nuance. Same penalties apply. Rulemaking authority is again similar, but it has to do with influencing a decision or knowing that the result of that decision would be the adoption of a rate or zoning plan that would cause financial gain to themselves or their immediate family or business with which they're associated. They again also can't perform any service to the city for additional compensation. Now, what's interesting with rulemaking authority is that you also can't perform any services or appear for any compensation within 1 year after termination of employment from the municipality. So let's say our city manager would happen to leave Columbia. For 1 year, that city manager can't come back and either lobby or solicit, act as a consultant, get any type of compensation for a year. That would apply to a position such as mine. It applies to your elected officials as well. Now, in a professional capacity, professionals are allowed to go back in a professional capacity and do, like an engineer could come back to the city and participate as a paid consultant. What is a business with which a person's associated? It's a business in which the person is an officer or director, or a trust in which the official is a spouse or dependent child own more than a 10% interest. So you can collectively, you have less than that, less than 10%, but if you exceed 10% interest, then that is a business with which you're associated. Now, the business, who thinks of a nonprofit as a business? Nonprofit's a business, right? So we run into this provision most often when we have individuals that serve on boards or commissions, or even our elected officials who serve on nonprofit agencies where people want them to be a part of their board, because obviously you've got folks that are well respected in the community. You've got people that come with a wealth of knowledge. Best practice is to work as an advisor, be ex officio, but don't take a seat on the board as an officer or a director of the board, because it creates that conflict of interest. You have to recuse yourself from any kind of activity that comes forward related to those boards. So a lot of times folks don't think about it being applying to the nonprofit sector in the same way. Okay, prohibited acts. Still part of the conflict of interest laws. You're prohibited from using confidential information that is obtained in your official capacity or with the intent to result in a financial gain to yourself, spouse, or dependent children, or business with which you're associated. That is use of the information by the official comes under this section. And then there's also a provision that is very similar that says that you cannot disclose confidential information that would result in financial gain to yourself or any other person. So when it comes to confidentiality, the disclosure applies not just to yourself, it applies to the world with which you associate, as far as misdealings go and protection of that confidential information. What is confidential information? It's anything that is transmitted orally or in writing that is not a matter of the public record or public knowledge. we go into closed session with the city council to talk about items that are under the sunshine law and in my other Bible. Items under the sunshine law that we're authorized to go into closed session on. Anything that's learned in that closed session is not to be disclosed for any reason. But under the conflict of interest laws, you have the additional penalty of any type of financial gain to yourself or any other third person that might be gained during that. I'm going to give you an example. Does anybody know who this is? This is Petraeus, right? He is the national poster child from 2013 and is a good example of sharing confidential information. The fall from grace of David Petraeus, who was one time the presumed nominee for the director of the CIA, was monumental following disclosure of his affair with a author, Paula Bridewell. And so her book, the book that she published, she was given unprecedented access to him. And he was investigated for divulging confidential information and ultimately pled guilty to the misdemeanor charge of mishandling that confidential information after engaging in a romantic relationship with his biographer, and was exposed following an investigation. He was sentenced to 2 years probation and $100,000 fine, and is obviously not the director of CIA as he had hoped he would be. It's a dependent child. Talked about, we know yourself, right? We know yourself, we know third parties in general. What's a dependent child? It's a child, a stepchild, a foster child, a ward who is under the age of 18, residing in the household and receives in excess of 50% support from the official. So how many have had children who we thought were dependents that were over the age of 18 living in their household? It's so common today. Now, by definition, under state law, your 30-year-old living in your basement is not a dependent child. But tell most parents that 30-year-old in the basement's not a dependent child, and they would probably giggle and say, yeah, right, they're in my basement. Right, so under state law, dependent child has to be under the age of 18. I would still advise and do advise any official that if someone is relying upon you for a substantial amount of support in their daily living activities, if they're living in your household, that you should consider that to be a conflict of interest, and a conflict of interest should apply to any gains received by them or with related to official actions. So, and automatically recuse or don't engage in the activity. And then, so when it comes when you're talking about elected officials, particularly, our council agendas here in Columbia are big, they're long, they have lots of items on, lots of contracts. Our elected officials are unable to favorably act on any matter which would provide a special monetary benefit to themselves or their spouse or dependent children. But what is a monetary benefit? Is it something little? Is it something big? State law defines it as being materially affected in a substantially different manner than the general public or class of individuals. We do have items coming before us on a regular basis, or probably more of an occasional basis, where perhaps a project is going through, and if an elected official lives on a street where a project is coming through, there will be street improvements in front of that elected official's house, right? But as long as the elected official is not treated any differently than others who are similarly situated, then it's not a conflict of interest just because there happens to be a public improvement project in front of the official's house. Then I'm gonna give you an example. A lot of, when those projects come through, typically a homeowner will have a driveway apron that gets reconstructed. It's okay for the official to have their driveway apron reconstructed, the same everybody else. If the public official's driveway is getting reconstructed all the way up to their house, that would be a problem. So it's an egregious situation, but those are things that we're aware of and we like to pay attention to. And most of the time we catch those, and even in design and construction of projects, to make sure that nobody's ethics are compromised as a part of the process. Misuse of public position is a little more nuanced perhaps than when you're dealing with public funds, and public funds seem to be a little more straightforward for most folks. The law on misuse of public position says that an individual may not act or refrain from acting by reason of any payment or receipt of anything of pecuniary value for themselves or any third person. Think about that, or any third person. The challenge that we have, and I'm gonna throw up development again, development projects can come forward to officials, and a lot of times there's back and forth that goes along with a development project, trying to improve the project, trying to enhance the project for the public benefit. Public benefit can be a third person benefiting. As long as it's the public at large, that's okay. But if an official is trying to negotiate a benefit for a specific third party that's not set out in state law, that's where the official can cross the line. And then we have to reel that back in and say, no, what we need to do is look at this holistically. Let's make sure that it's the public at large that's going to benefit from any kind of action. And most often when we do see that type of activity, it's when an official wants to express support for a project or lack of support for a project. So we always want to be very cautious. Let me give you another example. This one is Mayor Pugh of Baltimore. This Baltimore mayor resigned after coming under investigation for self-dealing in connection to a sale of thousands of copies of a self-published book. She arm twisted folks to buy her book in exchange for support for their projects. So, and her book was, I'm in the library, so I had to come up with one that involved a library resource. And I don't forget what the name of this book is. Can you see it up there? Exercising is fun. I don't know if that's a book that's in our library, but so that was her instance of self-dealing. We have the Nashville mayor who resigned. She was carrying on a relationship with her head of security and was forced to repay $45,000 in overtime that was not earned. That was arranged so that he could accompany her and was paid while she was on official trips. These are all cases that it's New Orleans mayor. I'm gonna bring this one up. I actually was at a conference, my international association was in New Orleans. And this mayor spoke to us and I was actually mesmerized. She was as engaging and very spirited. She loves local government. She was excited. But she also made history by being New Orleans' first mayor who was indicted in office. She had a 48-page indictment that carried on about travel improprieties, again, with her security guard. So I don't know what it is about security guards and mayors traveling, but apparently there's a lot way too much time. Um, in those relationships, so, yeah. And then the Baltimore mayor, was convicted in a theft and perjury case dealing with a romantic relationship with a developer. It seems like a lot of times one bad act leads to another bad act. And then an official who is trusted in the community, takes steps that they would not have otherwise taken outside of their position or their other life. So, in this instance, they had trips and fur coats and luxuries that were paid for, so. Misuse of public position. And I think that some of the examples that I was just talking about were real examples of where officials misuse their public position. They were in a position of power and they took those opportunities, to really push the edge of the envelope, and rather than reel themselves back in, they just plain jumped off the cliff and kept on going, in an unethical manner. So in misusing the public position, a lot of this has to do with what you might consider to be bribery or extortion. In Arizona, you have the mayor of Arizona who was arrested by FBI agents on bribery, theft, fraud, and money laundering charges. He was only 29 years old when he was arrested, and he is still acting as a business consultant to others. So some people just can't let it go. Even though he was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison and had to repay $600,000. Under public position, officials can't offer to promote or advocate for a political appointment in exchange for anything of value to themselves or the city. The biggest example of this one is
Here I'm gonna sound seated.
That's right? We all remember, I never could get his name right. Blagojevich. Blagojevich, thank you, Blagojevich. He's the poster child. Impeached as governor of Illinois, disbarred as an attorney, and convicted for trying to sell the Senate seat vacated by Barack Obama. He got 14 years in prison.
That's a time-honored tradition in
that.
Illinois.
I know. It's sad to say that it just seems to be, it's almost like desensitizing the
Normalized. Yeah.
federal law. That's a good lead into federal law. Under federal law, there are several provisions, and a lot of these prosecutions, as you can see from some of the examples that have been thrown up, is that the officials end up getting prosecuted under federal law for tax evasion, wire fraud. It starts at the local level, but once interstate commerce is involved, then these other statutes that I have up on the screen begin to come into play. I'm not a big expert on federal law. I am an expert on ethics and right and wrong behavior, moral and immoral, when it comes to how elected officials operate within a municipality. But when it comes to federal law, we would have to engage, or I wanted to at least give you an idea of what's there. The Hobbs Act has to deal with extortion, and interstate commerce is affected when any kind of enterprise is engaged in commerce, or if there's purchase of items across state lines. So just wanted to give you that list. example, when you're dealing with federal funds, because all of those, the federal laws, do come into play when you're dealing with federal funds. This was the city administrator in Brentwood. It's not all elected officials and mayors and their bodyguards. This was an individual who actually had a gambling addiction, or so was alleged at the time of prosecution as part of the defense, and newspaper reports that came out afterwards. He was sentenced to 6 months house arrest, 5 years probation, $30,000 restitution, fine, and a gambling addiction program. This does apply in the city, the HUD and CDBG special conflict of interest rules. We did have quite a bit of publicity. It's been, boy, time goes by. It's probably been 2 years ago that you would have seen a lot of reporting. We had a council member. This is a good thing. And it came out fine. It was all reported in the news, so I think I can talk about it. We did have a council member who donated a piece of property, wanted to donate a piece of property to the Voluntary Action Center as a part of the construction of the Opportunity Campus, right? The Opportunity Campus, the Voluntary Action Center actually preferred to purchase the property for whatever financing reasons that they wanted, because it worked better for the construction and financing of the facility itself. And that all has to do with how you're financing your transaction. But they really wanted to purchase it and then take the donation of the money back from our council member. Fine, and at the end of the day, it's a wash. It was still, from the council member's perspective, it's a complete donation because there's no financial gain, right? So the traditional conflict of interest rules under state law don't apply because there is no financial gain to spouse, or dependent children. It is a completely benevolent act and gift. That said, under the federal laws, the HUD CDBG laws are very, very, very strict. And anybody who is serving on a board or commission that has any recommending authority relative to HUD funds, or our city council, or our appointed officials, have to be aware of the HUD funds. Now, in this particular instance, and that's why it's all good news, is the project itself at the time that the donation was made, or that the sale, it actually ended up to be a sale of real estate. At the time the sale was made, was not a federally assisted project, and that the HUD officials actually determined for us that it wasn't a federally assisted project at that point in time of the transaction. So they said these rules didn't apply, but it gives you an idea of the kinds of tracks we have to go down to review and make sure that we're not crossing a line when it comes to that. Because obviously, in order to build that Opportunity Campus, a $600,000 donation is a pretty big, it's a pretty big deal to making that particular project come to fruition. So HUD and CDBG, what's important about the HUD and CDBG conflict of interest provisions are that there is no opportunity under the HUD laws or the federal conflict of interest that relate to HUD laws to disclose. It's the act itself which triggers the conflict of interest. So no financial gain was irrelevant. As we start to go down those analysis, the no financial gain is irrelevant under the HUD laws. And disclosure in and of itself does not give you the opportunity to recuse and not vote. It's just the act itself. So that's one of the reasons why that particular instance was reported so heavily, because our council member did disclose. They actually put all the information out in the public record. They wanted everybody to be aware that the transaction was going on and there wouldn't be a financial gain. But HUD does have some processes and procedures where you can get exceptions, but they're rather onerous and time consuming to follow through with. So I'm going to hit a couple more. I know I feel like I'm running out of time.
We're getting questions.
Are we getting questions? Okay. Um. We have some other examples of folks that were engaging, in corrupt activity on the St. Louis side. There's a lot of reports as you're starting to see come out relative to ARPA funds. We're seeing, um, I'm gonna skip through the financial disclosure. But we're just now starting to see some of those come out, and I think we will see more of those. The funding decisions that came down from the federal government to push out ARPA and the ARPA funds and the CARES Act, they came out so quickly. And the lack of time to be able to have proper oversight of the expenditure of those funds and even proper accounting on the back end was very difficult for municipal officials. So what about when there's a violation? Violations in Missouri, complaints are made to the Missouri Ethics Commission. I mentioned at the start of my program that the Missouri Ethics Commission does maintain a log of their decisions and determinations on their site. If you're interested in those, you can search by categories. There are protections for complainants. If you are a municipal employee, you are protected from retaliation by government officials for complaints that are made. And if there's any kind of adverse employment action taken against a government employee, they're entitled to reinstatement back wages and get reimbursement for cost of litigation. I am not going to go through, because I know that we're out of time and have questions. I'm not going to go through the misuse of public resources. That's where we have the information about the ARPA expenditures. The mayor of Kinloch actually had been indicted and accused of embezzlement. Ironically, some folks just don't give it up. This is another example of an official who after they were convicted continued to run into problems with law enforcement. So they get themselves back in the news in one way or another. Don't have time for nepotism. And I think with that, I'm just going to get you to the questions, if that's okay.
Let's start with one. This is from a Zoom member while they're getting their thoughts together. Is there a way for Columbia citizens to find accurate information about how trips city council persons and our mayor take are paid for? There is rampant misinformation demonstrated on Nextdoor about who pays for trips, how our mayor takes to participate in important meetings, conferences, etc.
Sure. The best way to find out information about travel and official travel is through sunshine law requests. We get those all the time. I think the mayor's travel has been sunshined extensively as far as payments are made and payments and anything else associated with that. So that's the best way to get that information. So if anybody's interested, they can request that information, and it's provided by the city clerk. Okay. Do you want me to read that? So the question is, and this is not out of my purview, but the question is, it was a $25,000 donation from a dead person for Murphy campaign for mayor last spring ever resolved by the Ethics Commission? That is not anything that's within my purview, and not anything that I even have knowledge of. So you'd have to go to the Missouri Ethics Commission website and see if there are any complaints made and what the outcome of those are.
So I had a question. There's a lot of rules and regulations that you talked about regarding dependents. But I'm wondering what are the rules regarding like relatives and children that are no longer dependents but are whether they can benefit from your actions.
So one of the slides I skipped over really quickly, here at the very end was nepotism. So nepotism does say that you are unable to, that you're a public officer or employee by virtue of their office cannot appoint or employ a relative to within the fourth degree of consanguinity. Generally, it really had as far as extended relatives go, Barbara, it has to do more with nepotism and employment of an officer or of an individual, but you're not considered to have the support unless it would fall underneath or any other third person. You could not have a benefit to a third person under the conflict rules, but they wouldn't be considered to be self-spouse or dependent child. So the nepotism has to do with the employment of those extended relatives. And so when you get to the fourth degree, and today's family charts are so off the charts as far as trying to figure out who is a half sibling, who's a whole sibling. You may not even know all these folks, but maybe it's a time to get one of those genetic tests and try to figure out who's within your fourth degree.
Just a follow-up questions. So what about financial benefit to your adult children, regarding their business or whatever?
Well, I think so. It's not a per se violation to an adult child. I think it gives the appearance of a conflict of interest, and I would always recommend that an individual recuse themselves from voting on any of those items. Certainly you can't share confidential information or anything else so that there would be a financial benefit, but it's not a per se violation under the law.
You may not be a historian, but are there more ethics violations today than you've seen in, when you first started, for example?
Sure, I do think there are more that we are seeing more. I think that we are starting to see people maybe get desensitized. Folks are getting a little braver. I like electronics because it does make your job easier, but it can also make it more complex. It's a little bit easier to hide things. Folks can create kind of a backstory using electronics that we've never were able to do before. And then you have that kind of desensitizing of the public when it comes to trust, but lack of trust in local government. I mean, you probably see it as well. I think we're somewhat at an all-time high. Social media puts out a lot of false information, and people don't know what to believe when it comes to social media. And so we tend to believe the worst. But at the same time, we need to do better.
So I want to thank you so much, Nancy Thompson, for sharing all this information, and it looks like we've just touched the tip of the iceberg, actually. So a lot to think about. So thank you so much. Let's give her a round. And I wanted to mention that next month, December 12th, Scott Christensen will be talking about AI and democracy, guardrails we can choose. And he'll be focusing on the long-term risk to democracy, automation of political communication, concentration of power, much more. So please to come here or be on Zoom and bring your questions. It's a really growing and sometimes very scary area for the future. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Yeah. That's up to every individual. Everyone responsible for their own complex of interests.
So there's.
Because we wouldn't know, right? So I don't know.
Something to it. Well, it's $5.
What did I say? 12?
Review process.